Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a practice that, for some, is a direct line to the divine, and for others, well, it's a total mystery. I'm talking about speaking in tongues. So what is it, really? And how did this ancient phenomena become a cornerstone of modern faith for millions of people? Let's get into it.
Okay, first things first, let's get the technical term out of the way. Glossolalia. It sounds complicated, but it's actually super straightforward. It comes from two Greek words, glossa, which means tongue, and lalia, which means speech. You put them together and you get the core idea, the phenomenon of speaking a language you don't actually know.
So a language unknown, what does that actually look like? What does it sound like? That's what we're going to explore.
You know, this practice didn't just appear out of thin air. To really get a handle on it, we have to trace its roots all the way from a single, pretty dramatic biblical event to a modern global movement.
And this is it. This is the origin point for Christians, right here in the book of Acts. It's describing the day of Pentecost, what a lot of people call the birthday of the church. And the main event? The apostles were suddenly speaking in languages they had never learned, and they were able to reach this huge, diverse crowd in Jerusalem. This one moment is the biblical foundation for the whole thing.
Now, this timeline shows something really fascinating. You have the original event in the book of Acts, and then, for centuries, the practice just kind of fades from the historical record. But then, bam, in the early 20th century, the Pentecostal movement explodes onto the scene, and they don't just revive speaking in tongues, they put it right at the very heart of their faith.
And for these early Pentecostals, this wasn't just some dusty old story. They saw it as real, tangible, audible proof that the Holy Spirit was still moving, just like it said in the book of Acts. It was all about a direct personal connection to the divine. It was an experience, not just a history lesson.
So, is it all the same thing? Well, not exactly. The source material actually points to a few different types. You've got unknown languages, which is when someone speaks a language they've never studied. Then there's a specific interpretation from an event in Acts 19, sometimes called Seventh-day languages. And then, of course, there are foreign languages, which takes us right back to that first Pentecost where the apostles were speaking actual human languages that the crowd could understand.
Okay, so we've covered the history and the different types. But that brings us to maybe the most important question of all. What's the point? For believers, what is the deep spiritual significance of this practice?
And just to be clear, from a theological perspective, the goal isn't simply to speak a different language. No, the purpose is seen as something much deeper, much more profound than that.
It really boils down to three key things for believers. First, it's a manifestation. It's seen as tangible proof that the Holy Spirit is present and powerful. Second, it builds unity. It's this powerful shared spiritual experience that can really bring a community together. And third, it's a tool for intercession, a way of praying that goes beyond the limits of our everyday words.
All right, so let's bring this all into the 21st century. How does this ancient practice actually fit into our world today? Let's take a look at how it's used and, the controversies that tend to follow it.
Today, you'll mostly see the practice in two main settings. On one hand, it's a very public, collective part of many Pentecostal and charismatic worship services. But on the other hand, for a lot of people, it's also a deeply personal and private practice, something they use to grow in their own individual faith. And this really gets to the heart of the modern tension. For millions of people, this is a vital spiritual cornerstone. But for critics, it raises a lot of questions. Some people within the faith worry about it being used without real spiritual discernment. Meanwhile, some outside the faith try to link it to psychological or even pseudoscientific explanations.
So, look, regardless of all the debates, here's the key takeaway. For millions of people all over the world, speaking in tongues isn't some historical footnote. It is a living, breathing, and absolutely defining part of their faith and their identity.
Which leads us with the big question. Is speaking in tongues a divine gift, a profound psychological phenomenon, or is it possible it's some combination of both? That's the question at the very center of it all.